Hello everyone, and welcome to this new series of tutorial videos for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and the Airbus A320neo. So today we're going to be looking at creating our operational flight plan. Now obviously Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 has its own inbuilt flight planning software, which of course is actually really rather good. But in terms of getting an actual operational flight plan, many of us, myself included, prefer to use SimBrief. So what we're going to do today is look at creating a SimBrief flight plan, and then we're going to go through and explain what all the numbers mean when once that flight plan has been created. So let's hop to it. We have got here the welcome screen from SimBrief. SimBrief is free as well, which makes this a fantastic source for simulating real-world procedures. And yeah, not only is it free, but you'll notice I use the operational flight plan layout for Easyjet, and they look pretty identical to the ones that real-world pilots get. So another big plus if you wanted to keep things as realistic as possible. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do before I enter anything is I'm going to select the aircraft that we are using, and it is this aircraft just here. Both of these are exactly the same for use in Flight Sim 2020, but you'll notice if you scroll down you may not have these two, because if you scroll down you'll find the A320 but you will not find the A320neo. So that means that the flight plan you're going to base your flight plan on may not have all the correct weights for the aircraft in Flight Sim 2020 and the A320neo that comes by default, or the fly-by-wire version. So what you have to do is you can either create your own based on the weights of that aircraft in Flight Sim 2020, or you can check the video description and I will pop a link in for you to download these and add these to your SimBrief fleet. And that is basically just a URL link to click, and it will bring you to SimBrief and import that airframe for you, so that you've got one of these. Okay, so I'm going to select my Easy Golf Sierra aircraft. There it is. So that has populated some figures, but obviously we're going to go through all of these and explain them. So the first thing we need to do is enter our airline. So the airline code for Easyjet is U2. We can then enter a flight number, any flight number you wish. Then let's enter where we are going to depart from. So if we choose Gatwick, for example, Echo Golf Kilo Kilo, we can then choose our arrival airport, so Lima Papa Foxtrot Romeo. The moment it does that, oh hang on, let's try that again. Lima Papa Foxtrot Romeo. The moment we do that, SimBrief gets to work and starts looking for a route for us. Alright, so if I quickly scroll down here to show you, a route has now been generated, but we'll come to that in a moment. Let's come back up here. We've also got our alternate, which has also been generated for us. Now you can leave this as it is, or you can select perhaps a different alternate if you've got a little bit more local knowledge for the area you're flying to. So for example, I would prefer my alternate in this case to be Lima Papa Papa Tango or Porto, and that is automatically then updated in SimBrief. We've obviously got the date, and we've got the departure time, which you can set. So we've already selected our aircraft type. We can leave that. Just before we go any further, if you hover over these little cloud icons here, you get the current METAR and TAF, which is the forecast, for you to just have a look. This is also a great chance and opportunity for you to obviously check that the weather is going to be alright at your destination, and if the original alternate that you've suggested, the weather wasn't good, you can use this to check it and of course change it. Let's move down. So these are the advanced aircraft options. Well, really with these we don't need to touch anything because the climb profile is uneditable at the moment in SimBrief, but basically we can leave that as is. The cost index then, CI number, is basically the amount of fuel, how efficient is your flight going to be. If you put a cost index of 1 in there, it is going to be super efficient, or as efficient as possible. If you put a cost index of 100 in there, then you're going to burn as much fuel as you can just to get to your cruise level as fast as possible, and a higher Mach number all the way down to your destination. Now, Easyjet usually use between 8 and 6. So, just try and, there we go. So if I'll put cost index of 8 in there, descent profile, so again, we cannot edit that, so we just leave that as it is. Now, come on to the fuel factor. In a perfect world, the fuel factor would be at 0. That would mean that the aircraft profile in SimBrief knows exactly how much fuel the aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator, or your chosen simulator of choice, is going to burn, and how that works. Now, at the moment, at the time of filming this, the Airbus A320NX, which is the fly-by-wire mod, which I use, currently has a rather, let's say, very, very efficient fuel burn, which means that if we left this at 0, we would be very, very heavy on landing because we wouldn't burn the fuel off in the simulator. So what we have to do is we have to factor in a percentage that the aircraft doesn't burn. So in this case, it burns less fuel than we expect. So we go to a minus figure, M for minus, and I found that at the time of filming, minus 20% is a good fuel factor for the burn rate of the fly-by-wire mod. Now, to be honest, I've even done an experiment with a fuel factor of 25, so you could set that up to 25 if you wished. Our registration is already populated from the aircraft frame, from the airframe that we've got up here. Our FIN number is the aircraft's manufacturer serial number. If known, you can just pop anything you want in there or leave it as default. The selected calling code, or SELCAL code, is usually used for aircraft that are doing transatlantic, trans-Pacific routes where there's no radar coverage, or they have to communicate with the aircraft using HF frequencies. So we can leave that blank really for the Airbus A320. We've then got our air traffic control call sign. Now this could be U21925. However, particularly for Easyjet, and it's becoming more common for a lot of airlines, the flight number and the call sign are different. So your flight number might be 1925, that is what the passenger would see on their ticket, but the call sign for the aircraft with air traffic control might be something like Easy34 Alpha Mike, and if you've watched any of my streams, that's my go-to call sign, unless I'm replicating a real-world flight and real-world call sign. Okay, now all of these, as you can see, have already been auto-populated for us. There is our scheduled flight time, 3 hours. It's telling us we're going to depart from Gatwick on runway 26 left, and if you're unsure if that is correct, again, you can just check what the weather is doing there. So the winds is 230 at 5 knots, so yep, we're happy with that. And our arrival runway is saying runway 28, again, check the METAR there, and winds 240 at 6, so again, that's pretty spot on. Occasionally SimBrief will get these wrong, so it is always worth checking. And for those of you flying in and out of Manchester Airport in England, SimBrief for some reason always selects a departure and arrival runway of runway 23 left. Well, the aircraft don't arrive on runway 23 left, and they usually always depart on runway 23 right as well. Particularly at the time of filming this, when we're sadly in the middle of the COVID epidemic and there's or pandemic, and there's not very much traffic around. So that's just local knowledge. If you think you know better than SimBrief with regards to these, then by all means do change those. What I will show you, however, is if you do change them, so let's just say we're going to go runway 26 right, it does say, do you wish to automatically select new SIDS and stars? And SimBrief will do that for you. So let me just cancel that. Put that back to runway 26 left. There we go. So it will automatically change the SIDS or stars for you. So that's pretty neat as well. All right, so let's carry on. So these are the taxi out and taxi in times, which normally we would just leave these, but they can be important because depending on how big your airport is, busy airfields might have a lot of traffic, so it may take you between 15 minutes to an hour to taxi to a holding point. Probably wouldn't happen in the simulator world, but it just needs to be looked at here. Basically, it's for fuel planning purposes. So your standard tax fuel is set to 200 kilograms here in SimBrief, which is about 20 minutes, which is fine. So yeah, so that's basically your taxi out time. That's your taxi in time as well. Extra fuel if you think you may require it. So for example, we did a flight up to Lapland over Christmas and refueling was not available. So in order to get back, you had to work out how much fuel you would need for the return journey, and we would add it in here. The reason the fuel wasn't available, fuel is available up in Lapland, but it is very, very expensive. So where possible, aircraft like to add extra fuel here, which is called tankering. So you add extra fuel there for the journey back. The altitude we can leave to auto unless you specifically want to fly at a given altitude, but SimBrief does a great job of calculating the preferred altitude for the weathers, so we'll just leave that blank. We've then got passengers, which you can leave to auto unless you particularly want to set how many passengers you've got. As I'm setting this up for Easyjet, Easyjet don't carry any cargo, so we leave that to 0. Cargo does not mean the hand baggage or hold baggage. All of that is included in the passengers and the corresponding passenger weights, so we can leave cargo set to 0. 0 fuel weight you can leave to auto if you've got the correct airframe sorted, and that will match up perfectly, so we can leave that to auto. Captain's name and a random pilot ID, so I don't know if that's actually the SimBrief user ID. It may be, I've not checked into that. And then dispatcher remarks, again we leave that blank. There's nothing that we need to put in there for our planning purposes. Okay, so coming down then, you have your Airact Cycle. This is updated, I think it's something like every 28 days. If you have a Navigraph subscription, you can update to the latest cycle. If not, then it will use the default Airact Cycle, which is basically the database of airways and waypoints that are available for use. It is important if you are flying on things like VATSIM to try and get one of the latest Airact cycles available, just because sometimes it will give you a route from an old Airact cycle if you haven't updated, and some of the waypoints may not be valid. So if I just come down here, you'll see this is the route that SimBrief has given us today. And if you were popping your own route in there from another source, or you were selecting, you can click view more routes, so there's plenty here for you to choose from. You can then analyze the route by clicking that. It'll analyze it and it will tell you that your route is valid, and if it is not valid because things are missing from the Airact cycle that you've got, then it will show you in red that it is not valid, in which case you'd probably need to consider changing your route. There's your route distance. And the percentage there is showing you that the route that we are going to fly is actually 4.8% longer than a point-to-point as the crow would fly. So 4.8 is great. Sometimes you've got a flight route with big airways that you have to take, and that can be as high as 20%, which obviously is not very fuel efficient. So that's fine. There's a route finder there which you can use. I don't usually touch that. You can use historical weather if you wish, and you have that enabled. Again, I always fly with live weather, so we don't do that. Let's have a little look then at our alternate airports. So this is where SimBrief probably isn't the best, and it's probably its weakest for. Let's have a little look. Now we changed this to Porto, didn't we? Lima Papa Tango. Realistically, we want more than one alternate required. If you're doing a very short journey, 2, 3, but realistically, we want 4. Now, if you've got local knowledge of the area which you're flying to, then you can populate these yourself. If not, however, you can tell SimBrief to find you a couple of alternates. So there's Malaga, and I don't actually know where these are off the top of my head. I would have to check those out. But you can also have a look, and it brings up the weather there. So you can see Malaga's looking quite nice, ceiling and visibility okay. So that may be our go-to one if anything went wrong. Having said that, all of them are looking quite good this evening as I do this. Alright, so we can also, if we need to, nominate a takeoff alternate. Now the reason you do that is if the visibility at Gatwick was below Cat 1 and you needed to perform an auto land, and say you lost an engine, or you were above the maximum landing weight as you took off, then you would need a takeoff alternate that you could go to and land to safely, but we can get into that another time. An en route alternate as well, so you can, we usually leave these blank actually. They're probably not needed for the simulator. Once we come down here, then you can see that is our flight route, and there are our alternates scattered around for you just to show you what that looks like. Once all that information is popped in, let's just quickly have a look over here. So as I've already said, I'm using the operational flight plan layout for EasyJet. There are several airlines that you can select here, or the Lido layout. Units, kilograms, very important. Make sure you know what units you are using. We don't want to confuse kilograms and pounds. Contingency, try that again. Contingency fuel is set to 5%, and our reserve fuel is 30 minutes. We do want a detailed nav log. ETOPS planning, that is ticked, but we shouldn't need it for this flight. That's usually when flying again over large open water areas. Planned step climbs as well if they are required. Runway analysis is required. NOTAMs and flight information region NOTAMs. Now if you leave both of these ticks, you're going to get a document which can be up to 50-60 pages. So what we can actually do is we can turn off the flight information region NOTAMs because they're not really applicable to the flight simulator world, and we'll have the flight maps as detailed. Once that is all set, let's generate our operational flight plan. So SimBrief now gets to work and gives us our flight plan. Okay, so let's have a look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at this in PDF mode, which is just here. Okay, so here is our operational flight plan. So this is operational flight plan number 1 for this flight. Now the flight plans are usually generated quite early on, so if things change, like the payload is going to change, or the winds and weather changes, then sometimes a second, third and fourth flight plan can be given, but that's probably not going to be used in SimBrief. You're only usually going to get a operational flight plan 1, for example, for that. We've then got our flight number, followed by our call sign. Here is the time zone that we are currently in for Gatwick, and the time zone as well for Faro, which you'll see are both exactly the same. So that's quite nice. This also tells you the time that the flight plan was calculated for an estimated departure at 21:55 Zulu hours on the 3rd of February 2021. Here we've just got information about the aircraft that we are using and the manufacturer's number. There's the registration and the performance factor that we set of -25. Okay, so let's just go starting down here. Here are the weights that we're going to be using for our flight. So the dry operating weight of the aircraft, which is basically the empty weight, no passengers, no fuel. Again, you can get this from basically emptying everything out of your aircraft in the simulator, and you'll know what that should be. Here's the payload then that has been calculated for this flight. So it's a payload of 18.7 tons, or 18,720 kilograms. That takes into account the passengers that you've got on board and all the carry-on luggage and hold luggage as well. That was set to auto when we calculated that, just to add a bit of variety to this flight plan. The estimated zero fuel weight then is essentially the dry operating weight plus the payload. So that is everything on the aircraft with the exception of the fuel. Fuel comes next then, and you can see the fuel there is just a little bit higher than 7 tons, 7,095. This, however, is not the block fuel. That is not the fuel you want to load on your aircraft. Okay, that is your block fuel minus your taxi fuel at the moment. So the next line is our estimated takeoff weight, followed by the fuel that we're going to use during the trip, which is basically from the departure to destination. We've then got the estimated landing weight, which is very important, and finally a underload calculated value weight, but we again probably don't need to get into that for simulator issues. We've also got maximum weights here as well, and again these are brought in from using the airframe, which you can download in the video description. So there's your maximum zero fuel weight, maximum fuel load available in Flight Sim 2020 for the Airbus A320neo, max takeoff weight and maximum landing weight. That we need to pay particular attention to. So our takeoff weight in this instance is 66815. So if we took off, had a problem and needed to land, we could turn around and land at our departure airport because we are below the maximum takeoff weight. Now you can land overweight, but there are procedures to follow, which again we're not going to go into here, but it's just interesting to note that we would be okay to just do a normal landing in for this particular flight. Moving here then, we've got our time out. So at the moment we've got estimated time of 21:55. The out time is where you should, if you were printing these off, you should write the time that you pushed back. The off time is the time that you departed. We've then got the time we're going to land in Faro, and that's where we'd write in the time we actually landed, followed by the time that we actually parked up. Moving over here then, this is a company route. We don't need to worry about that in the sim. There is our alternate. We've got our flight number, cost index that we set. The cruise flight level today will be flight level 370. That is the cruise temperature, flight level at minus 49 degrees C. And there's the tropopause at flight level 370. Again, you're going to see in the next tutorial that these numbers aren't important and we need to put these into the flight management computer. So just take note of those. That is our zero fuel weight. That should match the zero fuel weight over here. And our trip wind for today tells us that we've got a headwind of 65 knots. So we're fighting the wind all the way down for this flight. If we have a look here then, we've got the max shear rate. Now, the maximum shear rate, what that essentially means is it indicates a waypoint, in this case Balder. This is a waypoint that is estimated to have the highest shear rate value in meters per second per 1,000 feet. Not going too much into how that's all calculated, but what it's telling us is that is the point where wind shear or clear air turbulence could be expected. Now, if it is above the figure here, if it's normally above the figure of 4.0, that's when we really need to start taking note. Anything above 4.0 says there's potential for turbulence to be present at that waypoint. So what we would need to do is if we scroll down here, and we would find Balder. Where is it? There it is. So there's Balder. So we're looking about 1 hour 30 minutes into our flight. We could have quite a bumpy ride. that point, what we would do is we would tell the cabin crew, look, we're going to have a problem about an hour and 10 minutes in, so perhaps if you're going to do the drink service, then you want to get it all cleared up before, or don't serve it until after we've passed. So it's just something to make the cabin crew aware of, and you're aware of it as well if you start getting bounded around at that particular point. So the remarks, anything we'd need to write in there, we could do. This is the operational flight plan route. This is the route that is going to get programmed into our flight management guidance system in the McDo in the next video. So we can hold on, keep that in mind. And important here is the distance, 956. Very important this, because once we've popped this flight route into the McDo, then we want to check that number matches up or is very close. There is always some discrepancies between the flight simulator and SimBrief, but we want that to be quite near. So nothing too drastically different. If there is, then we may have keyed something in wrong. So again, it's just an error check. Here you've got space to write down the weather, the ATIS, the runway you're departing from, your initial ATC clearance, and of course a squawk code as well. So let's have a look then at these fuel figures. Now the fuel figures are very, very important. So taxi, we're expected to use 200 kilograms. That's the norm, which is 20 minutes. So we've essentially got kilograms over here and time in minutes and hours over here. So there's your taxi, fuel and time, your trip, fuel and time. There's the 5% contingency that we've added. That's the fuel that we need for our alternate should we have to divert. There's our final reserves, which gives us basically an extra 30 minutes of fuel should we need it, and any additional fuel that we had requested, which would also be shown here as tanker fuel if you were doing that. There's the total fuel, there's the total flight time, and again down here is the plan block. They're the same just because we haven't got any tankered fuel in here. So this is the amount of fuel that we would want to tell the refuelers that's how much fuel you want to pop into the aircraft. Once we've got the final block, then that would be written down here. So if I come across just here, this is our alternate. So had we got to go to Porto, we would want to arrive at Porto with a company normal reserve fuel of no less than 2 tons, and that would be the distance. That's the flight level that we would need to fly at if we were making that diversion. Reason for extra fuel, if any, is added just here, and then here is our fuel, expected fuel at our destination. Should be, in this case, 2.2 tons, and that's the fuel when we've actually shut down the aircraft. So takeoff weight correction. This again really doesn't matter in the simulator world, but just to quickly go through this, if we had, say, an extra 1,000 kilograms, so 1 ton of cargo, that is going to affect our planned block fuel by 81. It's going to increase our fuel burn by 81 kilograms. So if the dispatchers did come to us and say, we've got an extra 1,000 kilograms of fuel, we want you 1,000 kilograms weight wise that we want you to take, we would need to add 81 to our planned block fuel. If passengers were being offloaded for whatever reason, so a ton of passengers and cargo, then we would need 69 kilograms less. These figures here, 2,000, 4,000, they relate to flight level changes. So if air traffic control kept us for spacing with other traffic or whatever reason, if we flew at 2,000 feet below our planned cruise altitude, then that is going to increase our bland block fuel by 106 kilograms. If we were 4,000 feet below, then it would increase it by 246, and it would also alter the time as well of our flight. Alright, so moving down, what we've got then here is essentially all the information we need while flying. So here on the left hand side we've got our airways, waypoints, VORs. We then have our minimum off-route altitude. So what's the minimum off-route altitude? The minimum off-route altitude is as it sounds. If you have to go off-route for any reason, say you had a decompression or there was an emergency and you needed to come off-route, going direct to an airport, etc., then these figures here in flight levels, so that's 2,900 feet, 2,600 feet, these are the minimum off-route altitudes you are allowed to fly. Now all of these, as you can see, are pretty low. However, if say we were crossing the Alps, where the minimum off-route altitude would obviously be much higher, then you would need to pay particular attention to these, because if these are above 10,000 feet and we had, for instance, a rapid decompression, so we need to get the aircraft down below 10,000 feet, then we need to pay particular attention to these, because we could end up coming into contact with a mountain, essentially, if we aren't aware what the minimum off-route altitude is. Let's have a look then. This is the magnetic track between the various waypoints. So magnetic track heading, I'm not going to discuss the difference there, but essentially this is your heading if there was no winds, but that is the magnetic track between the various waypoints. This is the distance between the waypoints, and then this is the cumulative distance to go shown just there. So we start with 949 to go, and obviously that gets lower and lower. Next then we have got our indicated airspeeds, or further down they change to Mach numbers, so Mach 0.78, as you can see there. That is the status of the flight, so this is we'd be climbing. We then have our static air temperature shown just here. Useful to know whether we should need de-ice. Of course we would also check that in the flight deck as we were flying. Next then we have got our ground speed, our true airspeed, and the winds at that particular point. So winds 259 at 30 knots showing just there. Over here then we have the estimated en route time, or estimated elapsed time, and then what you would do underneath is you would fill in the actual time it took you to get to these particular points. Now there are a lot of them, so realistically pilots don't fill in every single one of these. They might check it every half an hour, every hour or so, just to make sure that they are on track. Basically you're checking the progress of your flight is keeping up with what is predicted in your operational flight plan. Finally then we have the minimum fuel remaining, and above it there is our company normal reserve as well. That is the reserve we do not want to get below. We should land with that or above that. So the minimal fuel remaining is basically the amount of fuel that you have or should have at these particular waypoints to continue to your destination, make an approach, have a missed approach, and then divert to your alternate and still land above the company normal reserve. So at the moment, used at the time of filming in Flight Sim 2020, these numbers are always going to show higher in the aircraft, just because the aircraft doesn't have the correct fuel burn at the moment and is very efficient and doesn't burn quite as much as perhaps it should. Okay, so scroll all the way down to the bottom. Keep going, and there's our company normal reserve just shown again. That's what we're expected when we get to runway 28 at Faro. Alright, so let's have a look here, and these are the alternates that we put in. There's our takeoff, there's our arrival, and here are our alternate approaches if we needed to do it. So ILS, 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 and it also just gives you a quick overview of the weather. So this is the ceiling, so the cloud ceiling, as you can see here. So you can choose, looking at all of these, I would say if we had to divert, Malaga is the best choice, because that is the ceiling, this is the visibility. So if we had to divert, then we've got a ceiling of 400 feet to play with there, visibility close to 3 kilometers, but at Malaga just here we've got a ceiling of well, above 10,000 feet and great visibility. It also gives us, however, a tailwind component and crosswind component, so that's something to take into account as well. So there's a crosswind here, but Malaga again would be my preferred choice if I had to divert, looking at the weather just there. These also give us a little bit more information on the alternate. So again, the minimum off route altitude, distance, flight level we'd fly to get there, the routing that we would need to take to get to our alternate, the time and the time difference, and the fuel difference as well. So we can just continue to come down. The next page then shows us the winds at each of our waypoints, and you can see here as well the shear rate. So basically this gives you the temperature at each of the flight levels, and it also gives you the wind speed and direction at each of the flight levels. As you can see, the highest shear rate is Balda, as we saw earlier on, at 8.5, so that would be quite we could expect some turbulence when we got there. Anything above 4 you can be on the lookout for turbulence, and they may not be shown in the weather charts, as we'll come to in a moment. This page is for air traffic control. That is what gets filed with air traffic control. It tells them all about your route and the aircraft and the kind of equipment that you've got on board as well. Next then is the METAR, TAF and SIGMET forecast. So this section of the flight plan includes all of the weather reports for your arrival airport, your departure airport, and all of the alternates as well. Worth looking through them because you may need to add fuel if required. We've also got some significant weather here, as you can see, turbulence forecast, etc, etc. If we carry on coming down then next we have the NOTAMs section. Now the NOTAMs, this is usually a lot of text to read. In the real world, what would happen is in the briefing room, the pilots would look through all this and make note of anything that is important to them, maybe highlight it with the highlighter. So at Gatwick, we can see the aerodrome will be available for departing passenger flights between the hours of 7:30 and 5 p.m. only. And various stuff like that. If you put in the FIR, the Flight Information Region's NOTAMs, and left that ticked on the planning stage, there would be a heck of a lot more pages. But it gives you something to read during the cruise section, if nothing else. And then finally right at the very bottom, once we've scrolled through all of those, we get to see our actual flight plan and significant weather. So there's our flight plan, and here is the significant weather. So as you can see just in the center of that, we would be crossing a jet stream. The jet stream would be at flight level 320, and I'm guessing this is pretty much where that turbulence would be expected. We've also got icing between the ground and flight level 150, and turbulence expected as well between the ground and flight level 160. So that is basically, if you do a quick Google search on how to read significant weather charts, that will become much clearer. But it's obviously something that we need to check before we depart. There's a higher level significant weather chart as well, so you'll see this obviously doesn't contain these lower level clouds and turbulence just there. And then finally we've got the wind feathers showing you the wind directions and of course wind strength. And then the very last page, and keep scrolling down, The very last page just here shows you the aircraft flight with relation to the tropopause, any terrain down at the bottom, and you can quickly see there as well, if looking through, if you've got any planned step climbs or altitude changes that has been suggested to you by the flight plan. So there we are. That is essentially SimBrief and reading the operational flight plan that it creates. We've obviously gone into a lot of detail there, so it all depends on how detailed you want to be with that. What we're going to do now is we're going to take this flight plan and we are going to load it on the ground into our McDo for the next tutorial. Hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, please leave those in the comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial video. Bye bye for now.